What's going on, guys? This is Empty Box, and today we're going to be talking about driving. Yeah, that's really the only way I can sum it up. It really is a little bit of everything. What we're going to be talking about is weight transfer, what is actually happening when you go through a corner, and how your inputs can affect your outputs, basically. How using the gas and the brake and the steering wheel can actually alter the way your car handles. These are all things that you are almost certainly aware of if you've ever ridden even in a street car just around town, but in a sim you're not so obvious because you don't feel it, so it's not as easily noticeable. So you do have to pay a little bit more attention to it and be more aware of it than what you would need to in a car that's actually moving around and you can tell these things are happening. So we're going to break this video into two sections. First, we're going to be doing some MX5 at Indianapolis Road Course because the car has 50-50 weight distribution or thereabouts, as well as this track is flat as a pancake. I'm going to be doing that from the cockpit camera and doing this live commentated. And then we're going to switch over to the Lotus 49 at VIR, where we will be using exterior cameras to see, in a more exaggerated sense, what is actually happening, because it is very obvious with the nature of that car. You can definitely see what is happening and what's going on. So this is, in a way, the building blocks to sort of understanding setups. Everything here is basic information that you should know, but you might not actually be paying attention to. However, I think it is important to pay attention to and realize what is actually happening when you do something to be able to understand how to go faster, or how to be more consistent, or how to make setup changes so that way the car better suits your needs. So let's go ahead and get going. Okay, say I was just pulling away from a street light right there. MX5, not exactly a top field dragster by any means, but you would notice acceleration like that because it's pretty obvious. You'd get pinned into the back of your seat, you'd feel the rear of the car dip down a little bit, which means, well, basically, the rear of the car has more weight on it. You hear about weight distribution, easy for me to say, and the MX5, 50-50 weight distribution, it's a great handling car. Well, weight distribution is measured statically. Driving is not static at all. For example, I'll go through this corner and just nail the throttle. Where's your 50-50 weight distribution now? Nowhere, because it doesn't exist. At rest, the car may have 50-50 weight distribution. However, in actual driving, that is always changing. For example, under braking, that weight is going to shift forward because, well, the back of the car is trying to pass the front of the car by way of doing a front flip, more or less. If you want a very visual, very obvious demonstration of this effect, just go ahead and look up any crash test footage where they fling whatever car into a concrete wall at 60 miles an hour. What happens? The front of the car basically comes to a stop, and then the rear of the car just tries to go over the top or flying sideways. Why is that? Well, it goes back to that whole object in motion tends to stay in motion thing. That's exactly what is happening. Very visual, very obvious demonstration. The rear of the car comes flying up and over more often than not. There's no weight on the rear wheels, whereas the front of the car tends to stay closer to the ground. There's more weight on the front wheels, which in a practical sense means that the car is, well, going to have more grip on the front tires. The end with more grip is going to be the one that has more weight more often than not. Now, this is not always 100% concrete case, but you'll find it is a very decent start. You should understand why it's not when you cross that bridge. You think about, as the opposite example to the crash test, think about, for example, a top field dragster. They do 0 to 300 in 3 seconds. 300 miles an hour, that is, not kilometers. Big difference. 0 to 300 in 3 seconds. When they leave the line, what happens usually? They pop a wheelie. There's no weight on the front wheels because the front wheels are in the air. It's the same thing to a much, much smaller degree, but it is the exact same thing. For example, if I go into a corner and I'm braking really heavily, for a really tight hairpin in a real high-performance car, like you'll see in the Lotus 49 when we get to it, the rear of the car is going to have no grip, so what's going to end up wanting to happen is if I don't go ahead and get the weight to a more neutral position, the car's actually going to rotate on me. It's going to want to try and spin out, even though all the weight's on the front. The front of the car is basically going to be pinned to the track, and then the rear of the car is just going to want to go flying all over. So, how does that relate to your inputs? Well, your throttle, brake, and steering are more than which way do I want to go, how fast do I want to get there, and how slow do I want to stop. How fast do I want to stop? Those are all used to control the weight. For example, you'll see me go through this corner here. I will go ahead and use no throttle. I'll just go ahead and brake, downshift, try and go through there. Car's just kind of not happy. It's not settled. The rear of the car just doesn't have the grip to keep up with the front of the car, meaning we get oversteer. Do the same thing here. Now the speed I went through this corner was perfectly acceptable had I used the right technique. In fact, if anything, it was slow. But because I didn't use the right technique, because I didn't have the grip between the front and the rear of the car balanced, the rear of the car wanted to go spinning around because it had no grip, had no weight, while the front of the car had all of the grip, had all of the weight. But to change that, you can use things like the throttle, things like the brake. For example, when you're braking into a very, very tight corner, what you'll always see when you look at, throttle traces, brake traces, from the pros that know what they're doing, they always brake really, really, really hard at high speed, and then as they get closer to the corner, they ease off. Why do they ease off? Well, because the tires have less grip due to downforce, which is a different topic than what we'll talk about here today, as well as the fact that they're getting that weight more centered in the car. They're getting the front and rear tires to do more even amounts of work. So if we want to get the weight more towards the rear of the car, what do? Give it a little bit of throttle. If we want to get the weight more towards the front of the car, what do? A little bit of brake. Now, of course, because nothing is ever that simple, for example, right here in this corner, that's wheel spin right there. Mashing the throttle actually gave me wheel spin, made the car more unsettled. It actually created what most people would consider oversteer because the rear tires had no grip. Even though they had grip, I was simply asking for them to provide too much work. So it's not always a case of, oh, I'm getting oversteer. I will just go ahead and use more throttle because, well, if that more throttle results in more wheel spin, you're going to get more oversteer. More often than not, though, what ends up happening is drivers try and go into the corners, especially when they're less experienced, and they just do nothing. I'll give you an example here with this next lap. And it makes the car more frustrating for them to drive because they don't understand why they keep spinning out when it's really obvious why they keep spinning out because they got the weight in the wrong place entirely. In a real car, this is really obvious because you can feel it. In a sim, not so much. So here we go. Car's just a lot more skatey. It's a lot scarier. It's just not happy. Why is it not happy? Because again, the front and rear tires are doing different amounts of work, and we haven't even begun to consider the left and right side weight shift, which is again the same thing. And for example, if the left side of the car was really loaded up and I mashed the throttle, depending on the differential that the car has, I could get a lot of inside rear wheel spin, right side wheel spin. What would that cause? That'd cause, well, wheel spin, which results in more oversteer, which usually results in more oversteer and probably crashing. So yeah, the throttle, the brake, they are more for going and stopping, as well as the fact that, well, you should probably be aware of that more so than what you need to be in the real world, because you can't feel it. It's not exactly something easy to notice. So let's go ahead and switch on over to the Lotus 49. So why VIR? Why Lotus 49? Well, not only is it the entirely opposite thing from the MX-5 at Indianapolis Road Course, but it's a very visual learning experience. With the softer suspension and much greater elevation changes, you'll be able to more easily see the dynamics of a car going around a track and how that plays out. You'll see under braking the nose dips down significantly more than in the MX-5. You'll see under acceleration the rear of the car squats a lot more than in the MX-5. But at the same time, it is no different. In fact, it is even more difficult than the MX-5, not only because of the fact they have more power and significantly less weight and significantly less grip available, but also because of the fact the suspension is so lightly sprung, it is very easy to get the weight transfer way out of balance, which will more often than not cause severe handling issues. What you'll often see with these historic Formula cars, as well as the more modern Skip Barber cars, is drivers carrying too much brakes into the corner, which basically means there's too much weight on the nose of the car. Essentially, more or less, the rear tires are there doing not nearly enough work to keep the car stable. With these small, short wheelbase cars that are lightly sprung, the weight is much more volatile. It's very easy to get it too far forward or too far backwards, and that is why it is very difficult, but at the same time, why you see cars like the Skip Barber car being used to instruct drivers. Because if you can drive that car, you fully understand what is actually going on and how the weight is transferring and what you need to do to go fast. Historic Formula cars, really no different, other than the fact that they have 250 more horsepower and less weight and crappier tires. There's a saying that almost everyone has heard before at least once. Smooth is fast. Well, what does that really mean in relation to this video? Smooth is fast. The smoother you are, the more smooth your weight transfers are going to be, which means that you're going to upset the car less, which means you can go faster because the car's going to be working with you rather than against you. There's a reason why when you watch the really fast guys and you analyze their replays, it looks like they're doing almost nothing, because they are driving so smooth that the car is working with them rather than against them. Unfortunately, not all of us are that good, myself included. So let's start to wrap this up. Unfortunately, you're going to always have to deal with weight transfer of some sort. Suspension is not going away anytime soon because, well, trying to deal with having no suspension is a lot tougher than having to deal with weight transfer. Every single car out there, from historic race cars like a Lotus 49 to the most modern of Formula 1 cars, still have weight transfer going on. It is simply the physics of driving a car. Doesn't matter even if you're talking about on the street. It's still happening, although usually you don't need to worry about it on the street. At least I hope not. So how does that relate to the topic of setups? Well, because a lot of setup work is, simply put, getting the weight to work with you rather than against you. For example, depending on your driving style, if you are a guy who does like to brake a little bit too late, you might need to run a stiffer front suspension to try and help keep the weight more off the front tires, more towards the middle of the car on initial turn-in. That way you don't have those handling issues. Although at the same time, You can only do so much, which is why I wanted to start off with this video for this topic, because, for example, trying to make the front end of this car as stiff as possible to keep from having too much turn-in oversteer because you have way too much brake in the car, it's never going to happen. You're chasing a losing proposition. You have to realize what you're going to be able to fix and what you as the driver needs to fix. So hopefully you guys learned something. Bye.